Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about domain knowledge. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, good morning, Frederick. What is domain knowledge and how to learn it? So this was posted on a video I made, which is called How to Stand Out as a Developer, and usually the 3 points that I make, which are just not always, but almost universally the 3 main things that makes developers stand out is tech skills, domain knowledge, and business mindset. So domain knowledge might be a new term for some of you. So usually what domain knowledge refers to is the domain of the system that you are dealing with. So what is a domain? Well, it's a little bit ambiguous here, because you could say that the domain is, the tool suite that you're dealing with. Like, I usually make a distinction here when I talk, and the reason why I make that distinction is usually because I refer to the sort of domain that you might find if you read, is it Eric Evans' Domain-Driven Design? For those of you who do Java and C#, this should be like doctrine for you. For other programming communities it might not be so much, but I still suggest that you have a look at this, because it's probably the most established way of writing at least enterprise level software. And the idea with domain-driven design is basically that you make that separation between the technical stuff, like your tools, like what IDE do you use, what third-party systems are you using, what coding languages are you using, so forth. These are things that I usually refer to as tech skills, which are, as I said, that's one of the big things to stand out. But the domain knowledge is the business itself and the business processes within that company, where it becomes a little bit tricky, where there might be some ambiguity. Because an example would be if you have a business process where, for example, say that you're selling cars or something like that, right? Well, the way that the business works, the thing that is in the physical world might be that someone comes to a retailer, they place an order for some car somewhere. That order goes into some digital system somewhere. There's an agent or some person who manages that and makes an order through the factories or something like that. And there's all of these business processes that take place in order for the person who went to the retailer to get their vehicle, basically. That is the domain. The processes and the entities, the nouns and the action, like the entities and the actions within that business process, that is domain knowledge. This is extremely important and very undervalued, I would say, for a lot of software developers. Usually the worst software developers, the worst professionals that I know, are the software developers who learn how to code, but they don't learn how the domain works of the system that they are working on. They usually, as I refer to them as code monkeys, where they are basically feature factories in essence, or engines. I actually like engines a little bit better than code. It depends on how you define it. These are my terms, so I just make them up as I go along. But basically what that refers to is that this is an individual who has learned how to write software. But the problem which very few software developers seem to understand is that if you only know how to write code, but you don't actually understand the business or the company or all the things that you are writing software for, then your code will be a very poor imitation of what actually happens within the domain that you are dealing with. Why is this important? Well, I'm very glad that you ask. Because the work of a software developer is to create a virtual representation of that domain so that you can create some more efficient solution to whatever problems that the company has. As I was saying earlier, maybe that order went into some digital system. Well, back in the day, they used to send that by mail, or they might have had an office somewhere where they go in and they call people up on the phone or something like that. But now they have a digital system, and that digital system reflects, or they have entities like orders, cars, items within the car, like extras and so forth, and pricing and so forth. All of these entities are domain entities or domain objects within that domain, and they are there because because what the computer is doing, or what you're doing with these digital systems, is just trying to make a virtual representation of all of these physical things and physical processes so that you can streamline it and make it more efficient. That is basically impossible if you don't understand how these things actually work. So in the doctrine of, or like in the domain-driven design style of working, you try to name your entities and your systems and your different actions within the system as closely as possible to the actual physical business domain or the business processes that the company deals with, because that gives you a common language. So when you talk about data types in the database, like a user or a product or something like that, that's language that, say, your stakeholder or your boss or so forth, they will understand that. So when you talk about your systems and you name them, mapping them as close as possible to the domain is a very good idea. Now, you're not always going to be able to create a perfect mapping between your digital systems and the actual processes within the company, but the more you understand how the company works, how the people in that company do their jobs, because imagine if you're going to create some system that gives people the ability to use a computer to do some part of their job more efficiently, or a product that users are going to use, you have to understand those people. You have to understand what they're going to do and what they want from that system. And if you don't understand the domain. That is the key thing. And a lot of software developers who are lazy or so forth, they sort of skip that, because they sort of just focus on the coding and they don't take the time to actually understand sort of what are you trying to achieve with all this coding. Because, and you see this very often, and it becomes very apparent very quickly when you see systems become very half-baked, very ad hoc, very weird features that sort of work, and like especially in those old bloated internal systems that you see across many of these sort of corporate enterprisey applications. These are usually businesses where they have tons and tons of like features. Everything is super weird, like flaky, or it doesn't work, or it's very cumbersome to work with. There are all these sorts of issues. The reason why that usually happens is because when you design these systems, if you do it poorly, with a poor understanding of all the things that make up this domain, well, then nothing really fits. It's a bit like paving a road with oddly shaped rocks instead of very nicely shaped bricks. You're going to be able to make something work, but it's going to be really uneven and sort of clunky to drive across that thing. But if you have people who really know their stuff and really understand the domain, they're going to get you're going to get a much smoother road to deal with, and your system is going to overall be more well designed, because the features and the requirements, they fit together. As I've said before to you guys, like you usually can tell if a software developer really knows what they're doing when they can build a feature on the first week, and then on the next week they get a new feature requirement, a new scope, and that feature just smoothly and efficiently fits into the solution that they already created. If you create really bad abstractions or try to make things too generic, or you don't really understand how to model the domain, everything becomes a hack, and that's how legacy gets started. You create the wrong abstractions or the wrong designs of the system, and then you can't just go back and undo that, and you have to just keep on adding on top of that. This happens much quicker if you don't understand the domain. That's why it's so important to understand the domain. So what I want you to take away from this, guys, is that domain knowledge usually refers to that you understand the processes of the business that you're trying to deal with. So if you're creating it doesn't matter if it's a computer game and you understand sort of how the game should work, what actors do you have on the screen, how do people like to play the game, what type of people are going to use the game, or if it's a bank, how does these finance things that you're dealing with, how do they actually work, what are the entities, what are the actions, what are the customer needs and the people who are using the system, what my stakeholders, who are they, what are they going to use this thing for. Understanding how this physical system, which can be all of these things that I've talked about, how all that works in reality, and then being able to map that in efficient data models and system designs and actions and all that good stuff and functions, you know what I'm saying. That is the challenge of a software developer, because you're in essence a person who takes something physical or something semi-physical, a process or whatever, and converting it into a virtual representation within your computer, within your programs. That's your goal. Therefore, you have to understand those physical processes so that you can do that as well as possible. Because if you're going to create, a physics engine or something like that and you don't know physics, well, then that engine isn't going to be very useful. If you're going to build a calculator but you don't really know math, that's not going to be a very good calculator, now is it? It's the same thing if you're going to create a shipping system that helps some company that does business globally or so forth. If you don't understand how they do business, the system is going to suffer for it. And a person who a software developer who has the tech skills and the domain knowledge, and then as we've talked about business mindset as well, these are the people who build the best fitted systems for the problems that they are dealing with. They are usually the people who stand out, the people who really become high value to any given organization, because they understand both the organization and all of the tools that the organization is using to work more efficiently. Have a great day.